Welcome to the Glass is Half Full talk show. Let's face it, life can be tough in many ways. Here on the Glass is Half Full, we focus on how life is tough financially. Dealing with these financial realities can be a challenge. Essentially, we have to find ways to do more with less. Less money, that is. The show is focused on helping you discover ways to achieve that goal, even if you don't have a lot of money to work with. We'll be meeting people from many different walks of life. They'll share their stories and expertise. Looking to do more with less and maintain a positive attitude while you're doing it? Welcome to the Glass is Half Full. Now let's join Richard and his guests in the studio.
Hey, we're joined by David Trahair. And if you pardon me while I put my glasses on, I'm going to read this because David's got quite a CV, as they call it. David is a chartered professional accountant, CA, a personal finance writer, trainer, and e-learning content developer. He also is an author of 6 books on personal financing issues, including 3 national bestsellers. He was a columnist for CPA magazine from 2014 to 18. His book, Crushing Debt: Why Canadians Should Drop Everything and Pay Off Debt, outlines the evils of debt and how easy it is for debt to spiral out of control, and with examples of real-life stories of debt disasters. If you're a Canadian who's already struggling with debt, Crushing Debt can motivate you to face your financial problems and show you, step by step, the most appropriate solutions for getting out of your personal debt hell. Filled with proven advice, Crushing Debt is a call to action on an urgent and debilitating problem for far, far too many Canadians. So David, welcome to the Glass is Half Full.
Thanks, Richard.
In your book, Crushing Debt, you say that not all debt is the same, David. Can you provide us with an overview of that and perhaps just maybe pay some special attention to the type of debt that gets more Canadians in such financial trouble?
Sure. Well, there's 2 basic types. There's installment debt and revolving debt. Installment debt is any debt that requires a partial repayment of principal. So a mortgage is an example of installment debt. A car loan is an example of installment debt. And what that means is that if you just stick to the payment schedule, you automatically have paid off the debt at the end of the term for a car loan and the end of the amortization period for a mortgage. So by definition, you're forced to pay it down. The other type is revolving debt.
This includes both principal and interest, and everything gets paid off.
That's correct, yeah. Principal and interest. So you're paying the cost of borrowing as well as the original amount you borrowed. Revolving debt is different than that. Revolving debt just requires you to pay usually a small amount every month to cover the interest. So for example, a line of credit, even if it's a home equity line of credit, you get a certain amount of credit that you can borrow, and all you have to do is make the monthly payments or whatever the payment terms are, and you're good. As long as you stay below the total amount you can borrow, you're not required to pay down the principal. Credit cards are another example. You can borrow up to your credit limit, and then you only have to pay the minimum payments every month. And in some cases, that's not even enough to cover the interest, let alone pay down the actual debt. So I believe that the real problem is with the ease of availability of this revolving debt, the ease of availability of getting credit cards, for example. Because people aren't forced to pay it off, they don't. They end up just trying to cover the interest, just paying the minimum payments, bumping up to that credit limit, and then just staying there. So I think that's the main distinction, is those 2 types. The ease of availability of the revolving credit is the big problem today as I see it.
You mentioned in your book the concept of borrowing binge, I think is the way you refer to it.
Yeah.
It would appear to me that the revolving credit, as you describe it, lends itself more to this idea of a borrowing binge than fixed credit.
For sure. For sure, because it's essentially cheaper to get. You think about your cash flow, you're allowed to go and buy something that you don't have the money to afford to buy, and then all you have to pay is a small monthly amount thereafter. If you bought a car or a house, your payments are much larger because a good chunk of that is the principal that you're required to pay back. I mean, the other interesting thing I find is that this concept of good debt versus bad debt, and I guess it's similar to the revolving and installment in some ways. I mean, good debt is generally seen as installment debt. For example, a reasonable mortgage to buy a home is usually considered good debt because you're acquiring something that hopefully is going to appreciate in value. So you're making a good investment as long as you can afford it. Another example of good debt is often student loans. You know, you're borrowing to get educated so you can make more money in the future. Great. Bad debt often is revolving debt. So you get a credit card you know you can't afford to pay back, and you go on a great vacation down the Caribbean that you want to go on, but you can't afford to pay off that credit card when you come back. So it's expensive revolving credit without any associated asset, no investment that you've got. It's just fun.
Interesting. You mentioned in your book the Canadian Bankers Association, is it? That
yes.
They did some kind of a survey, a study that indicated that 56% of people using credit cards pay them off monthly, leaving the corollary that 44% don't.
That's
right?
exactly
Which means
right.
they're carrying debt from one month to the next, right?
That's exactly right.
These numbers surprise you in any way?
Yes, I would say they surprise me. I would have thought fewer people pay it off. The problem with that statistic from Canadian Bankers Association, which is the spokespeople for the big banks, is that it's based on survey data. So they've surveyed people and asked them whether they pay off their credit cards. So you got to take it with a grain of salt. What I would like to see is I would like to see a bank's general ledger showing me what the receivables are, and the banks will obviously know it's their business.
You want to see what produced those numbers, eh?
Exactly. Yeah. I want to see the raw data behind how many credit card revolvers are there. But if we assume that number is right, then 44% is a terrible number. I mean, that's approaching half the population can't afford to pay off their credit cards. And you know, I've been writing about and thinking about personal finance for almost a couple of decades now, and I can't think of a worse investment than a revolving credit card debt. You know, often it's at 20 or 20% or even more than that. It's the worst investment you can make because that interest is compounding against you.
If it is debt, in other words, if it is not paid off.
Correct.
If it's paid off at the end of every month, most credit cards don't pay any interest at all, do you?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. I mean, you know, if you can afford to pay it off every month, the credit card's a great thing, right? You buy something, you don't have to pay for it for 3 weeks. There's no interest charges. But if you can't afford to pay it off, the table is totally flipped into, I would say, one of the worst investments you could possibly make. Great investment for the financial institution that you owe the credit card debt to, because they're recording interest receivable at 20% or more. But compounded usually monthly. So compounding is great for them. It's great for the investor, the person who's advancing the money, but it works against you when you owe.
Perhaps, because I'm a simple country boy and all that, you could explain the idea of compounding to me.
Sure. I actually looked into this for an article I wrote for CPA Magazine a couple of years ago. And basically what it means is, say you've got a 24% interest rate on your credit card. Many credit cards use an average daily value method of calculating the interest. So what they'll do is they'll say, okay, at the beginning of this credit card period, say you owed $1,000. Then they literally calculate how much you owe them every day during that period. So you buy something for $100, then your balance goes up to $1,100. You make a payment, it goes down. Right. So they get the average daily balance for that month. Then they multiply by the 24% interest rate per year times whatever the number of days in the period is, say 30 or 31.
Essentially a month's worth, if you want. 2%, right?
Yeah, 2%, or 30 divided by 365. And then they add that to the amount you owe at the end of the month. Right. So essentially this method means that interest is compounding monthly because the interest gets added to the balance, and then that next month it's included in the balance that you're paying further interest on.
So this becomes the famous story of paying interest on interest.
Interest on interest is terrible when you owe. It's great when you invest, Compounding interest is great when you invest in like a GIC.
Right.
In fact, you want a more frequent compounding period when you invest. But when you're on the other side, it reverses.
Right.
It's the worst
Well,
thing.
the GIC is where the bank's paying you rather than you paying the bank. Right?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Many of the people listening to this might very well be, baby boomers like me, and more than a little interested in what happens with retirement. If during the course of your working life, you're in the habit, and you actually over that time spend more than you've made, what's the effect on retirement?
Well, the projection for retirement for people who are spending more than they make while they're still working is a horrible thing to consider. Because personal finances are pretty simple, right? You've got your take-home pay, that's the money you get to put in your bank, and then you've got your spending. So your offside, if your spending is greater than your take-home pay, and that results in credit card debt. So if you're in that situation, and then you think about when your income gets cut off, i.e. when you retire, your income's going to go down significantly. Often spending doesn't automatically go down significantly when you retire. Many people continue to spend a similar amount after they retire, or it might even go down a little bit. So if you haven't saved anything, then really you're banking on the two main pension plans in Canada, Canada Pension Plan and Old Age Security. So let's throw some numbers out, right? Canada Pension Plan pays about $13,000 a year if you've paid in enough over your life.
Right?
The maximum, right?
Yeah.
But most Canadians come nowhere near that. The average amount for people who turned 65 in 2019, beginning of 2019, was only about $7,000 from Canada Pension Plan. So people
That's
can't
low, eh?
bank. Yes,
Yeah.
People can't bank on the max,
Right.
because they might not have paid in enough for the required number of years. So let's say $7,000 from CPP. Old Age Security, $607 a month right now, about $7,000 a year. So an individual,
$1,300 a month.
yeah. Right, so about $14,000 a year combined CPP average and Old Age Security. If it's a couple, you double that.
Right.
So if you haven't saved anything else, you've got to live off that. Okay, and most people, it's insufficient. It's not enough money. So
With a
they
part-time
spend
job
more.
at Walmart. Right?
Then that's when you end up having to go back to work, even if you didn't want to. I mean, that's why I think people like you and I need to try and educate people about the dangers of spending more than they make now, and try and bring in how bad this is going to be in the future if they don't get things back on track.
It's very hard for us to truly imagine the future,
That's the problem.
to make it real, to us.
That's the problem.
And if we don't, then I suppose it's very hard to overcome the habits of a lifetime.
That's right.
I see this, as you probably understand, in my business. I see it a lot. People coming in to see us in their 70s and 80s even, and it's largely because their lifestyle hasn't changed. They haven't been able to change their lifestyle that much. Sometimes I find it's beyond their control totally. There's all kinds of family demands and things like that still happen to people, in spite of the fact that they're now senior citizens. But if the habits had been different earlier, they might be
That's the thing.
better shape. Right?
It's very much a personal thing. I like to say that, we all lie on this big scale. We're either very cheap and frugal. The other end of the spectrum is those that spend a lot of money. So all of us lie somewhere on this scale.
Like any other bell curve. Right?
Exactly like a bell curve. So, I think the best thing we can hope for is some sort of happy middle ground. Because the ultra frugal people who never spend a dime, never borrow, don't have kids because they're too expensive, don't go on vacations, they're going to die with a multi-million-dollar net worth.
How many kids do you have, David?
I'm not here. I got 2 kids. What's the point of that life? That's too extreme. But this end of the scale, which I used to think was really an American problem, it's not, as you probably know better than me. There are lots of Canadians that are spenders.
Oh yeah.
I think
let's call it a universal problem.
Okay, the universal problem.
Yeah.
So I think the best we can do is try and get these spenders to loosen up a bit and try and move up the scale closer to this end. They don't have to become this.
Maybe
but
you mean tighten up a bit.
I guess tighten up a bit with their
Right.
finances. Exactly.
It's very, very difficult to do.
It is. I know it's difficult.
Today's world,
Yeah.
we're bombarded with everything, and hardly anybody is bombarding us with the idea of saving money.
No. I mean, it's keeping up with the Joneses,
Sure.
advertising. This, social media, I think, is the worst thing ever invented, almost, for personal finance, because you see this ideal life of all these people who are perfect and rich and can afford all these things, and you try and do that by borrowing.
So, David, if a person is in financial trouble, what steps can he take to turn the situation around?
Well, the first thing I recommend is that the person, or maybe it's a family we're talking about, is start to track where their money is currently going. In my opinion, whatever you track tends to improve. Like, for example, your Fitbit or your fitness tracking watch. If you're aiming for 10,000 steps in a day, you're much more likely to do that because you know how many you've done. Similar thing with personal finances. Because we aren't required to do this, there's no government authority requiring us to track our personal spending. We've got to track our business expenses for tax purposes, but not personal spending. Because we don't have to do it, most people don't. And I think that's a big mistake. I think if people just took the time to track, even for a few weeks or a 1 month period, ideally you do it ongoing every month, but just for 1 month, track where the money in your family went. Now, this is harder for those people with multiple accounts, multiple credit cards, multiple bank accounts. That makes it very difficult because you've got so many different sources that you have to summarize. And a lot of times I recommend people
And you have to put them
reduce that.
together, too.
That's right.
Yeah.
You want a comprehensive summary. You don't just want what you spent cash on, but what did you spend with your credit cards, your bank accounts, and cash. And I know it's labor intensive, and most of your viewers aren't accountants, but that information is golden because that's your personal fingerprint. That's very personal to you or whoever is doing the tracking. And I think that's step number one to try and convince people to sort of tighten up, right? Because if you see where the money's going, then you'll know, okay, here's the big money drains. And then the next time it comes to spend that, it might twig you to say, oh, actually that's going in this category. This is an area we should cut back. So personal financial tracking, whether it's doing it manually, if you're lucky enough to have a computer and maybe proficient with spreadsheets, maybe download your banking information. There's a website called mint.com that I have no affiliation with, owned by Intuit, where you link your bank cards and your credit cards, and it does the tracking for you. Any method you can use to get a summary of where your money's been going, I think, is step number one.
So essentially, in doing that, you're making it real for yourself, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's not some numbers. To a lot of people, probably are just that, numbers.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
they become real when you translate the number into a large coffee at Tim Hortons or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'm all for cutting out the small things, but really, if you want to make significant progress, it's the big things that you should really be thinking about if you can cut them back. For example, those people that have a house with a mortgage, it might make sense to consult a mortgage broker to try and get a better mortgage deal the next time when your mortgage gets renewed. Think about the big expenses. Think seriously about your car strategy, right? Cars are huge cash pigs for most people. Whether you buy or lease, they're going to suck money out of your pocket for the rest of the time that you own that car. So think seriously about the car that you're going to get. Do you need a car? Can you use the alternatives, ride sharing, things like that? So yeah, I'm all for thinking about the small things, but personal financial tracking or detailing your spending will show you where the big opportunities are.
Don't you think that for a lot of people, perhaps a lot of our viewers here, the concept of, for instance, do I need a car?
Yeah.
That's not something they're going to ask themselves. And in a real way, I think I understand this. Okay? If you've got to get to work and you got to get there at 7:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it can't be done by bus or anything like that, but the realities. You know, if you've got kids and
For sure.
sometimes just doing the shopping and things like that. You may not need a Mercedes-Benz to do it, but
Yes.
to say, do I need a car? But most people are going to come away saying, yeah, I do. You know. Now, if you live
That's fine.
downtown and everything is generally footwork, if you live in the center of a city, that's there's often a strong argument because of the cost of maintaining it and all that.
For sure.
But if you're in
Parking.
the semi-suburbs or suburbs and all that, having a car is almost a necessity.
That's right.
in
But then it
people's lives.
becomes, okay, well, what car am I going to get? And I think that's where a lot of people, I think, get into trouble. Yeah, they need a car, no questions, right? Then it becomes, well, how are they going to buy that car? Most people don't have $25,000
That's right.
whatever is sitting around, so it's either a car loan to buy it or leasing. And I think, I deal with this in one of my other books, the car lease versus buy decision. Leasing is not necessarily bad. It's just more complicated than buying. There's more factors that you need to consider. I think the problem that people get into with leasing is if they go through the calculation, they say, okay, I can afford a car with a car loan of, say, $450 a month. And I'm going to pay that car loan off over 4 years, keep the car for 8 years, so you get 4 payment-free years. Brilliant. So they don't go and lease that same car for, say, $300 a month. They go and lease a more expensive car for what they could
$400
afford to pay for 4 months, and then sentence themselves to lease payments for the rest of their life. That's what I think gives leasing a bad name. But yeah, no doubt about the fact that for many people a car is a necessity, but it is a big item. If they track their spending and all the costs associated with owning and maintaining and running a car, oil, gas, maintenance, insurance, it's often a big chunk of cash for most people. And the bigger the car, the bigger the cash outflow.
It certainly is one of the major items in a family budget, a monthly budget.
Yeah.
One of the things you hear about, just to segue off to something else here for a minute, David, the idea of a reward card, or reward cards, we'll say. Okay. You have some thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, basically, for non-credit card revolvers, for people who pay off their credit cards every month, then there's a myriad of options, a cashback card, travel card, and you might as well get the card that's the best for you.
In other words, use the reward.
Use the rewards, right? It doesn't cost you anything because you're paying off that balance. But the value of a rewards card is often around 1% of the amount that you spend. Okay? For a credit card revolver that is paying interest at 20% or more, that's a terrible trade-off. Okay, so my suggestion for credit card revolvers, those that can't afford to pay off their credit cards, is get rid of any kind of gold card or any kind of benefit card. Call the bank up and say, replace my gold card with a base card. No bells and whistles. Often the interest rate's half or less.
Is it?
It often is, yeah.
All right.
Because you're getting tricked essentially by thinking you're getting all these rewards, but they're.
And you're accepting the idea that the interest rates are higher.
Yes, exactly.
Matter of fact, you're probably not paying any attention to it.
Probably not.
Yeah.
But if you sat down and did a pure mathematical analysis, a rewards card where you have to pay them the 20% is a terrible investment. Just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, that math doesn't.
No, that math
doesn't compute,
jive.
does it?
Does not compute. No, no.
How about another thing we hear a lot of and see some of, and certainly in my business, is the balance transfer offers.
Yeah. A balance transfer offer, and the first thing with respect to that is it's a very competitive market. These deals are always changing. But a balance transfer offer will come from another credit card company. You might get junk mail from your credit card company asking you to transfer balances from another credit card. And essentially what the new company will be doing is saying, look, you owe $10,000 on your credit card. If you transfer that to us, we'll charge you 0% for 6 months. Sometimes it's better, 12 months. Sometimes it's 2%. So you immediately reduce the interest you're paying. Say it used to be 20% on the previous credit card down to 3 or 0%. The problem is that period expires, and that's why these other credit card companies are offering that to the person, because they know the person's unlikely to change their attributes, change their ways, their habits, right? Yeah, exactly. So after that 6-month period, that credit card company is going to be the one that's charging them 24%. That's why they will be willing to take that financial hit of offering them this seemingly great deal.
Is it, we just hit on something there. The idea of getting into that rut.
Yeah,
The habit. No, not that so much, but I have had the same car and home insurer for the last 52 years. Think I'm in a rut?
Well, it may be worth shopping around once in a while.
Maybe worth,
Yeah.
But I have a tendency not to be interested in shopping around.
Okay.
Reasonably satisfied with everything. I don't think I'm overpaying. I may be. I don't know. But you become a certain amount of inertia sets in.
It's human nature.
Yeah.
You're busy too.
Same thing must happen with credit cards, right? And this is why the credit card company can afford to offer 6 months no interest.
Right.
Because once you're there for 6 months, you're not going to move.
That's right. Yeah, because I mean, life is busy. People have kids to raise, and they're driving everybody all over the place, going grocery shopping. And most people, at the end of the day, they're beat. They don't want to sit down in front of a computer and search for different credit card options or whatever it is. And that's the advantage the financial institutions have, is this inertia among consumers.
Sneaky devils, eh?
Well, they know how to make money, right?
Yes. Yeah, they do, don't they?
Yep.
Something like you to hear your views on, David, is, how do you pronounce it? HELOC?
HELOC, yeah.
Home equity loan.
Home equity line of credit,
Right?
yeah.
Line of credit in this case, yeah.
They are becoming very, very popular. Essentially, it means if you own a house that's worth this, and you have a mortgage of about this amount, there's room that you could borrow a home equity line of credit. And because the financial institution is lending you money and they have a claim on your house, if you default, the interest rate is lower, okay, than a regular unsecured line of credit. So this is almost irresistible for many Canadians, obviously, because the housing market's been doing pretty well. They've got room, they borrow for who knows what, house renovations, but maybe trips.
Seems to me to be very attractive to the senior citizen types like me.
Well, for anybody with cash flow issues, it's very
that may be me
attractive.
Too. But it seems to me, with as you get up in years, that maybe you want to take those trips that you've never had a chance to take and whatnot, right?
Yeah. Well, this brings up the whole area of reverse mortgages, right? Where
which is the same thing, isn't
it? Well, it is. It's not technically a home equity line of credit. It's a different product. The problem is that it's very expensive. The interest rates are high. There's many fees you have to pay, and there's no competition. It's the home equity bank, I think it is the only one that offers a reverse mortgage. So you can't shop around. So the problem is, while it's attractive to get that money up front, they're charging you a higher amount of interest, so that when you move or pass away, that reverse mortgage is often a very high balance. So it's a very ineffective way, or an expensive way, to get cash out. It's much better to apply for a standard home equity line of credit at a much lower interest rate. And again, this gets into your credit score and your income and all that.
Have you run across people beyond the age of 65, we'll say, who likely have retired or are about to retire or whatnot, and certainly their income is going to be heavily based on the, what do you call it?
Their income?
Well, no, pensions, and
their pension.
What do you call that? The superannuation.
CPP.
These people seem to have a great deal of difficulty getting any kind of credit, really, even with equity in a home. Have you run into that?
Yes, I know, because the banks have their checklists and their ratios to look at with respect to your the income, usually according to your tax return, right?
Right.
You got to conform to these ratios. So, I mean, if we can recommend to people, I recommend to people, even before they retire, while they still have a job, is the best time to apply for a home equity line of credit. That's much easier, because, as you say, you go into retirement, your income goes down, you might not be eligible for it.
I think there's more to it than that, too.
Probably.
There's the negative side of lending, right? Not every loan will work out the way it was intended to.
For sure.
People will run into problems and all that, and the lender very often has to take action to recover his money.
Right.
Which will take the form of collection calls and lawsuits and things like that, and negative stuff.
Right.
And, this is what I see every day, right? People coming to me when these things are happening. Okay? And one of the things that I've seen is the difficulty people have had to solve their problem through some form of consolidation or whatnot.
Yeah. Because
now they're on the fixed income pensions, and creditors are very reluctant to lend money to somebody with only that kind of income, because that kind of income can't be seized.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
And probably not something that you see all that much at your end of all of this, but but it does affect how people might look at a home equity loan type of thing, or a reverse mortgage or something. It may be the only place they can get money.
Yes, I think a reverse mortgage, even though it's expensive and there's many fees, if it means being able to afford groceries, then go for it, right?
Or that trip to Spain.
Perhaps.
Okay, David, thank you very, very much. It's been very, very informative, and I'd like to remind everybody that you can get much more of this. You can find out all about David's other books, as well as, what was that one again?
Crushing Debt.
Crushing Debt, which you didn't explain to me. Are we crushing the debt, or is debt crushing?
You can read it both ways. So it depends who you are, whether debt's crushing you, or I'm telling you in the book how to crush your debt.
A lot of double entendre in that.
Exactly.
I'm sure the rest of the book is just as good.
Yeah, I think so.
Also, you operate a blog?
Yeah, I have a website. It's Trahair, T-R-A, and then hair.com.
I never talk about hair, David. But anyway, thank you very, very much for all the information you've imparted to us. And well,
thank you, Richard.
David, thank you.
Okay.